Okay, shut her down.
I was wondering, how many were gonna be here tonight anyway. Yes. She's got. I'm doing fine. No pictures of baby yet?
Well, your mama's got some. Grandma's got some.
You don't?
Well, I can come by. Is this like one of those things that antibiotics doesn't kill? There's a few. There's like, Jim Hansen, the guy that made the Muppets.
Yes, pretty much. Pretty much.
Good evening, everyone. Face to face. Grab your hymn book and turn to number 24. For the beauty of the earth, for the glory of the skies, for the love which covereth over and around us lies. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of human love, brother, sister, parent, child, friends on earth and friends above, for all gentle thoughts and mild. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For thy church that evermore lifted holy hands of love, offering upon every shore her pure sacrifice of love. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening, Heavenly Father, to humble our hearts to you, God, to praise your name, and Father, to sing hymns to you, and to learn more about your word, Heavenly Father. And we thank you, God, for this opportunity you've given us to do this, and we thank you for the blessings that you give us every day, Father, for answering our prayers, God, and providing for us and guiding us every day. We thank you, God, for your love and compassion and mercy that you have for us, and Father, that you gave your only Son to die on the cross for our sins, that we may able to be here this evening. Be it they're in pain or ill or traveling. We comfort them and heal them, God, and we bring them back safely. Please be with the ones that have death in the family, Heavenly Father. Please comfort them, Heavenly Father, and we would be able to support it as well. We ask you, God, to help us grow in spirit and in truth, Heavenly Father, and give us a desire, Father, to learn more about your word, God, that we may grow in numbers and we may be able to find a good preacher for this congregation, Heavenly Father. We ask you, God, to forgive us for our sins. We ask you this in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Guess that's working. All right. We're going to get into Judges tonight. And if we look back, we see Moses was a great leader. God gave Moses the law. And so they had the law. The children of Israel had the law. And then whenever they crossed the Jordan River and Moses was no longer with them, Joshua guided them. And God gave him the instructions of what to do. And they always looked to God after their first initial little problem they had there. And they were pretty faithful and did pretty well there for a while. And now we're going to see, after Joshua's gone, we'll see that he's mentioned here a few times, and what happens next. Now, let's see. Okay. Flip over here to Romans 15. Got a few little things to say before we really get into the book here. Romans 15, verse 4. For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. Now, I've heard some people that don't really like to study the Old Testament. They want to study the New Testament only, but there's valuable lessons we can learn from the Old Testament, and we're going to be able to see parallels to things happening today lots of times when we read the Old Testament, and there's some real good lessons to learn there. Now, let's see. Let's go to Deuteronomy 7. Okay, I'm going to read a few verses from this. When the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them. And nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughter to their son, nor take their daughter to your son. Did I read that wrong? You shall not give your daughter to their son, nor take their daughter for your son. For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. So the anger of the Lord will be aroused against you and shall destroy you suddenly. Okay. Now there's more things it says there, but that's probably enough to get the idea of what's happening here. Now these people that live in the Canaan land there was different like city-states and stuff, and there was 7 different separate groups, as we just named them there. And these were abominable people. They were just, on the same scale as Sodom and Gomorrah. They were just everything that, like it said, good things are called bad and bad things are called good. Kind of like today, And these were really vile, wicked, perverted people. And so God didn't want them mixing with his people. And so let's start out here. Yes?
I was thinking about what you were saying about Old Testament, and I thought about how people view what happened in the Old Testament. There's a lot of factors involved that make people think that it's not related to them, meaning the culture, the laws, the miracles, the age that people live, and how they communicated with God directly sometimes. And so there's a lot of factors that people say, well, that's not even nothing related to us. I mean, God doesn't talk to us directly, he talks to us through the Word. And so that's why they kind of shy away from confusing things that we can't understand how people would do that to their own families and to their own relatives and things like that. But the general aspect of how God reacts or how he treats his people is the same thing he would do to us right now. I'm just reading, generally here on verse 14 of chapter 2 says, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of the plunderers. So I'm just generally saying that, well, God does get mad. I mean, I'm concerned about, United States, this nation. God's going to have anger against this nation and just let it go its own way and destroy this whole nation.
Yeah.
So,
Well, some people might believe that we're being punished right now.
yeah.
The way things are, you can't trust justice. You can't trust the judges. You can't trust the laws.
Mm-hmm.
Just two quick examples. Aren't the Ten Commandments and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah both in the Old Testament?
Yeah.
So, if you understand what I'm talking about, though, how people may see it as like very extreme things that happen in the Old Testament as opposed to today, I mean, we live a shorter life. United States is only, not even 300 years old yet,
Okay. Are you talking about something like Uzzah being struck dead?
Yes.
Okay.
Things like that.
Yeah. God doesn't do that today that we know of.
Well, if it wasn't, first of all, that should make everybody afraid,
Yeah.
and that's the purpose. But if you didn't have the Old Testament, you'd have a very, very hard time understanding most of the New Testament.
Yes.
There's so many things in God. You don't really, in the New Testament, you do not see the character of God very much, but you sure see it in the Old Testament. That's where your punishment comes in. So we should be assured that there's going to be a punishment, whether it's physically today or in the afterlife. God's going to have justice.
Yep. Did somebody have their hand up over here? Yeah, Karen?
Well, I think that what I see in the book of Judges is that, it's much like Fern just said, is that we need to understand when we need to see what God was like. We can go to Judges because, God's punishment was, engaged in this evil and the idolatry that they engaged in. But what we also see is the intense love of God for his people and how he never failed them. And so we can carry that into our times. You know, when we see all this engagement in evil and all of the things that are happening now, you know, there are punishments, I believe, that are coming from God. You know, whatever they may be, and I don't know those. You know, I mean, we can always say, well, you know, COVID was a punishment from God. Well, I don't know that. But I know that God punishes evil. And I know that also when his people stand up and say, please help us, that God is going to do that because God loves us so much that he's going to help us in some way.
Right. When they were down in Egypt, it took 400 years for them to come out of there. They were slaves down there for quite a while. So, but God listened to them. Paula?
I had read that Judges was a sad, tragic story of failure, the failure of this consistency in the worship of God and in the honor of God. And any one of us at any time individually can see our failures in our worship of God and our honoring of God. But we don't want to come to that end. We have time. We have Jesus, the blood of Jesus, to repent of our sins and have it washed and move forward. And these guys just spiral down.
Yep. Go ahead.
Well, while we're talking about this, Karen Deb was right, that we see that what's going on is terrible, and we don't know whether God is punishing or that's something that is allowed to happen or what. But we know when, in book of Acts, when Aaron went down to Caesarea, I believe it was talking to the people from Tyre, and he was putting on this big show and his big robe and everything, and they kept saying, voice of God, voice of God. And of course then God struck him dead. He died, I think, it was even 3 days later or something like that. But if you were standing there in that audience, you would see him get sick and die. That's your conclusion. That's all you conclude. But we have an insight into it that God tells us he was eaten by worms. God, the angels, destroyed him because of his arrogance. But so we don't know. But you can look around and say, I better do what's right, or I'm going to be included in this. Now we're all going to die. It doesn't matter we died of COVID or 20 years ago. I don't know if that's 20 years, maybe 5. But anyhow, so we got to look at it that way. But we don't. If we just give glory to God and do what he commands, we don't have to worry about it. Because this is just a period of time of living on this earth, and that's all there is.
Yeah. One thing I might add, I had a thought whenever Paula was talking about failure. That was what, there was a number of different things. They call them the book of Judges. And the book of failures was one of them. I remember that when I was reading some stuff. So they had frequent apostasy, and they also had frequent cries to God for help. And it's like a wave. You got your low part and you got your high part. So they get down, they get low enough, and then they cry out for help. And when they get up right and high, they're not doing God's will, and they're going way off. Okay, anybody have anything else they want to say before we start the first questions? Okay, let's see. Here it says, skim the book of Judges, reading as much as you can, and state the theme of the book. Anybody got some themes they want to throw out there?
Was that the first question?
Yeah, the first question was, what's the theme of the book? What do you think's the theme?
In the book of Judges, huh? Well, what I wrote down was it's a history of Israel after the death of Joshua, and that we were just saying about how the people went from following God to not following God routinely, and when they didn't follow God for a while, they got a little bit exhausted, and then they'd call out for a little support. God raises a judge. The judge lives a while. They're doing okay while the judge is there, and then they don't do good again. Generation to generation.
Yeah.
Changes all the time. So the book is about what happened during 400 years, 450 years, somewhat around in there, between the time of Joshua and the kings.
Okay. Paula?
It brought to mind that peak and valley thing with service to God and loving God and worshiping Him. And this is a small comparison, but when 9/11 hit, I remember hearing on the news and reading that church attendance went off the records. People were ready to give their love to the Lord, and look what happened. And then, no more. And it just does that.
Yep. Anybody else?
Well, and what I feel in reading Judges is that these were just really dark times for the Israelites. They just, it's like they're milling around with no purpose at this point. They don't have that leader anymore. They truly don't. The judges weren't necessarily, great leaders.
Yeah. Or ideal
Yeah.
people.
The ideal people. Nobody like Joshua. Nobody like, Moses. And that's what the Israelites were always used to. And so now it's just kind of like they're in an evil place, and they're just kind of, they don't seem to have any purpose.
And another thing you might see is they had those despicable
Yeah.
Canaanites in there mixing in with them. And they were the thorn in the side and the sticker in the eye, or whatever that phrase was. So they were causing problems for them.
I guess my perspective of a theme for Judges is man's tendency to neglect God and look to self, and then God's judgment, mercy, and deliverance. It was a pattern. It was a pattern throughout Judges that God would leave the Israelites to try and follow the law that He gave them, but then they would start to get comfortable. They would trust in their riches and their wealth, and then they would forget Him and start to worship false gods, and then He would judge them. Then He would have mercy and raise up a judge to judge them and deliver them from their enemies, and then they'd have peace again for a while, and then they would go back right. It was just a pattern, a repeating pattern. And sometimes we look at our own nation and say, well, we might just be in a time of like the Judges where we're turning away from God, and He might judge us. He might judge us and let an enemy nation come and take us over for a while or something, and then we might wring ourselves free of that and come back and start, being faithful again. Or it could just be that if you look at the whole world and see that there's really no righteousness anywhere in the world, that He's just letting it go, and until the sinfulness is full in the whole world and it's done.
Yeah.
It's hard. We don't know. We just can't see what's going on. But in Judges, it's good because you can see the pattern. You can kind of see this is what happens to man in our own nation. This is what's happening. It's like from the 50s until now, it's just been backsliding. I mean, America was so strong in the 50s. There were churches everywhere, and everyone went to church. Some church right over there. Now it's like everyone's, there's very few
Yeah.
people that go to a sound church.
Right. Okay, we got Vern first there.
You study the Old Testament and But I'm not saying that. But, the logic is there.
Yeah, true. And Jeff, you have something there?
Yeah, this is kind of a store-bought definition. To show that God's judgment against sin is certain, and His forgiveness of sin and restoration to relationship are just as certain for those who repent.
Yeah, that's a good phrase, yeah. You didn't have anything? Now, I just wanted to say that I look back when I was just a little guy, and the black and white TVs were in style then. And we used to watch things like Leave It to Beaver and the old cowboy movies and stuff. Now, those old cowboy movies, they always had a time when they were going to church and they were all singing gospel hymns and stuff. You don't see that kind of stuff happening anymore today. I mean, usually the guy, if there's a preacher somewhere around, he's a bad guy and he's taking all the money from people and, running off with the women and stuff. It's not they promoted people as being, religious and being good people and stuff. And, but nowadays we count the amount of perverts that are in the shows, and after they get past one, then we go to another show. So we're pretty well narrowing down our viewing anymore and things we can stand to watch. Okay, anything else? Yeah.
Well, that's not relevant to the question that you asked, but I did notice that there was a repetitive statements in the beginning of chapter saying that the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. That we see that frequently. And then you come back and ask for help that later on.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading something about it was a circle, and it had different things on there about doing evil and then repenting and then calling on God for help, and then God, was like the water cycle. If you ever, in your science class, they had a circle about the water cycle, water evaporating out in the ocean and going up in the sky, and then it condenses and comes down. That's what I thought of when I saw it. So one thing they get is divine chastening, and God's provoked to give them that divine chastening and to get them straightened out. Let's see. Okay. All right. I guess we kind of answered something like that. The cycle the Israelites passed through repeatedly. That's in question number 2 in the history of the Judges. But this tells you to watch for this cycle and summarize it when you can, because we're going to be seeing that happen over and over again each chapter just about. Okay, let's go to number 3, and that's we frequently read about Baal and Asheroth. You can cite a Bible dictionary or encyclopedia and summarize the information about these gods. So anybody happen to get that? I think I got a paper here somewhere that has them. If I put it in the right place. Haha. Anybody have anything on this? Okay, Karen?
Well, regarding Baal, Baal was not one god. It was multiple gods. And in Canaan, what they did, typically in being Baal worshipers, is they would pick one of the Baals in a certain area, and they would be worshiping that particular Baal. And,
Okay, yeah, that was pretty good. Anybody else have anything, Paula?
And I have a little extra about Baal, that they offered sacrifices so they could have the rich soil and the rain, and that would hopefully bring them great harvest. And believing that he controlled the rain was likely what was being challenged when Elijah declared to Ahab and Baal, worshiping king, that there would be no rain in the land until Elijah on behalf of God said so. That was just somebody's thought on that. I don't know for sure. Good time.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? Ken?
These two gods were associated with the people that they were conquering at the time. The Canaanites, the Phoenicians, the Syrians, the different people that were in that area, they had gods that were not God. And so they end up being part of the big problem. I think Karen gave a pretty good description of what they are. One is of war, one is of love, and so forth. And they are throughout this this section of the book everywhere. Because one of the things the Hebrew had to learn was that if he mixed himself with the other people, it was easy to be led down the path and start worshiping Baal or Asheroth or something like that. Almost could say that the people who were the Hebrews who were worshiping God were undergoing testing by God to see if they were faithful.
Okay. So Baal was the male god, and Asheroth was the female god. Now, I might add just a little bit of stuff here that I have found. The high places where Balaam was worshipped, and so self-torture was one of the things they liked to engage in also, and human sacrifice. And of course, Jezebel was the one that was associated with Baal, and she championed Baal worship there. And what else did I have here? Yeah, I think that pretty well covers it. They're false gods, and everything about them was wrong. So, gives us a little idea what was going on. Okay. Number 4 would be after Joshua's death, what question did the Israelites ask the Lord, and what response did the Lord give? Okay, Vern.
Well, first of all, I think we need to address the first chapter through to maybe the middle or 10th verse of the second chapter, because it's sort of confusing here when you see after John's death, they asked for the Lord. But then what happened at that point seemed to be, and I think it's right, seemed to be a rehearsal of them entering the promised land and what they did. So it comes to a point where all this next scripture from there, first chapter, part of second, is about before Joshua died. But it says at the beginning that after the death of Joshua, such happened. But I think it's telling about it, but it's starting before it tells about that. In the second chapter, it tells about the death of Joshua. And so here we are. So I think that's what it's talking about. So, and you rehearse this, and where Judah was supposed to go up first. That's the question. But and that's what happened already. They didn't do it twice.
Yeah, the way I looked at it was like a recap. When you're watching a serial of some type, and then they give you the recap to catch you up, make sure you're in the right spot. It wasn't like the timeline was cut right off, but it was kind of, a little bit from the last bit of Joshua was pulled over to the Judges book of Judges. So
Also, it gives you more information, gives you the same information, but it's added, some of these things are added to that, to, the book of,
yeah, it's like Chronicles and Kings, where you can read almost the same thing in one chapter, in another chapter, but then you might find a little tidbit or two that will give.
there is in there, if you read it, there's the guy in the book of Joshua, over again, a little bit, but it just goes real quick over, but then it adds some things that isn't in the Joshua.
Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah.
What I saw in there was, this is the very, we get Joshua passes away, and now the people, they've just been given in the last book, right, or the book we read, coming out of.
Yeah, back in Joshua. Yeah.
And Joshua ends up passing away, okay? So now, the whole thing is really, it gets pretty clear. Who's going to be in charge? If you have one leader in your whole community, and they die, what do you do to get a new leader? Well, we know what we do here, but this was the Hebrew population, right? They have to find out what to do. They go to God for their answer. Who's going to lead us? And so they're in that particular moment. Who's going to lead us? They got to ask God. And God gave them an answer. And Judah's going to lead them. That's how they know.
Yep, the fourth son's tribe. Not the first one.
I contend that this first chapter is about something that happened before Joshua died. You don't believe it, read the second, down halfway to the second chapter, and it talks about the death of Joshua.
Yeah.
So what I think it's doing is a recap, it's a recap of their coming into the land and conquering it, and that's exactly what happened. Judah went first, and so it's not saying anything new there, it's just saying Joshua, before he died, they were working for the Lord, but I think they started messing up a little bit after.
Well, and doesn't it point out too that, part of God's edict to them was that they had to drive out all of the Canaanites, and they had to do certain things and not involve themselves. So in the recap, it says, Zebulun and Asher and Dan and all of them and Benjamin didn't do what they were supposed to do. So the tribes, this is leading into showing that they're starting not to pay attention to what God told them to do.
This could have been 100 years.
Yeah, could have been.
I don't think it was.
Yeah.
So I hadn't
Ah.
looked at it this way, this is good to talk about. So when Judah was given the territory in the book of Joshua, he didn't actually capture it at that point, but he is, with the help of Simeon now in Judges, going to capture it.
I think it was
I-
just revert back to what was already happening in another book. And now he's writing a new book, and that new book is clarifying. So if you just took this book and look at it, you would be in the middle of the Judges, or sorry, the Judges, but now this book goes back to Joshua and just skims it, and then it starts and saying, and the people of God, they just turn away from God. And I think that was the second generation did it most. But we see that they weren't, even Judah did not run and take all the Canaanites and run them out or kill them. So none of the people did totally what God said. And then
Forced labor
Yeah.
or paid tribute.
Slavery, how you call it. And so that's what happened. This is a great period of time. We don't know how much that this is happening. But it's a new book, it's clarifying what happened, and now it's gonna go on to chapter 2.
And the way I get it straight in my mind is, so you got a timeline here, all right? And you got Joshua over here, and you got Judges over here. And they don't just start, one book don't just start right, it's cut off. It goes back into this one and takes some of it and it eases you in. And it's written by somebody in the future looking back. So they say it's who was it? Samuel. That's who they surmise did it with little help with maybe some other of the prophets.
Well, yeah, that's the point. A lot of times when you read a book, if you have some idea of when it was written, it helps you make a choice on what you think it says.
Yeah, the reason why we say that, there's a number of places, let's see, that I was last week talked about time during the monarchy in the days of Israel had no king, and that's said in chapter 17, chapter 18, chapter 19. So there was no king yet, so we know it was later on down the line. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why I read one place where they think Nathan and Gad helped with the writing some. I don't know. Or whatever. Maybe they were, next door neighbors or something. I don't know how that worked. Let's see. Where were we at here? Anybody, any more on that?
Well, it's just a big surprise, because when we read Deuteronomy, you start getting the idea that the conquering is done, but when you move into Judges, you find out it wasn't done.
Well, they're still talking about some of it yet. In 1:3 it says, "So Judah and Simeon, his brother, come up to me to my allotted territory, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I will likewise go with you to your allotted territory." And Simeon went with him. So we see that Judah was the one that went with Simeon as helper. Okay. Why do you think that Simeon was the guy he asked?
Yeah, I read they were blood brothers. Maybe they were closer.
Yeah, they were pretty close, though, weren't they, in their territory?
Their territory, where they could have been the same place.
Yeah, so
Reuben was first, Simeon was second, Judah was third. So, Judah was fourth.
so
Who was second, third? The priest came out third.
Levi's. But Simeon, their territory was right inside of, I lost me. Yeah, Judah. It's Judah's territory.
And also tended to put some of the cities right up against the border of Egypt. They had that territory probably south of Judah.
Yeah. They were kind of like a single cell that had a little nucleus right in there, and that was Simeon. So anyway, all right. Number 6. What city did Judah attack first? And what success did they have? Anybody got that? Karen? Bezek.
And they struck down 10,000.
So he did a pretty good job there. First one. Okay. Anybody else got anything to say about that?
They were all pretty good about defeating, but they weren't good about driving all the way out. It's like we stop right here, we don't finish the job. That seemed to be all of them doing that. Because I'm sure that a lot of these people head for the hills and hide in the hills or wherever, the town's being attacked. Smart, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's people from these cities to get out or someplace where it's a small town or whatever.
I could probably see the army marching down the road and the dust from them, and they had their warning. Okay, whom did they capture in the city, and how did they punish him? Paula. Okay. All right. Now, why would they do something like that?
Can't fight, can't run.
And it's kind of like hamstringing a horse, right? Equivalent.
And you don't have any balance if they cut off your big toes.
Okay, now this gives me a thing to question about here. So this is the first time we've heard of this happening so far. You know, the other Joshua, and just starting out here. Now, what was the story behind this guy? Oh, maybe that's the next question. Better look and see here if I'm getting the cat out of the bag here. Okay, yeah, that's the next question. Anybody have anything more to say on that? Okay, so the next question, how did this man respond to the treatment he received, and what finally happened to him? Okay, Karen.
Well, he seemed to say, this is how God has paid me back, or this is how the Israelites' God has paid me back, for doing the same thing to 70 other kings. So, you know, I've had 70 other kings under my table when I cut them, you know, cut off their thumbs and their toes too. So, you know, it's just, I'm getting paid back. This is karma.
Yeah.
You know?
It kind of sounded like he had the right attitude about his punishment there.
Just think of the time that he was king. He wasn't doing all of this in 70 in one day. So he would take it, think he'd conquer here, go raid over here, and take the king and disable him. Because you try to pick up something, you don't have any thumbs. Very difficult.
Yeah.
You have a guy told the brother on that. You could walk, but it's not pretty good.
Okay, so this reminds me of a thing that thing that happens back there in Exodus, one of those laws we have back there, Exodus 21, 23 through 25. So 21, 23 through 25. But if any harm fellows, then you shall give life for life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, toe for toe. No, I didn't say that, but that was the idea we got, right? Thumb for thumb. But here's another thing. Oh man, I didn't write that down. There's also something about mutilating people. And I forgot to write that down, but I'll look that up for next time. But I can give you a little story about what happened back in Belleville, Ohio. You know, back during the Vietnam War, a lot of people didn't want to go into the war. And one of the kids at my school, I don't know if this was an accident or not, but anyhow, he shot his toe, big toe off, so he didn't get taken by the army. He stayed home. I can remember that. A lot of people talked about it. So a lot of the kings that he had dealt with, he says that he had 70 kings. Am I answering another question? Okay. All right. So there were 70 kings that he had taken captive in this inhuman way. And he understood the reason he was treated that way and stated so. And he ended up dying in Jerusalem. Yes?
You gotta look at this and understand the timing, because in David's time, which is 500 years later, if this is the beginning of Judges, Jerusalem did not belong to any Israelite.
Jebusites.
Jebusites is what they had. So, but see, they conquered it one time and took it, and then this is almost 500 years later. Now it's back in somebody else's hands. So you got to put time in there. And they write down the writer wrote down Jerusalem. Well, I don't know why the name came before the naming of it, but it seemed to be strange that because when the Jebusites had it, they had a different name on it. But when back during Abraham's time, it was there. It was called Salem. So the city
Yeah.
was there, it just had different names.
Yeah, I got a lot of information, I think, on that, about Jerusalem and who was there and when were they there and everything. It says there in verse 7, it says, and Adoni Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather scraps from under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. Then they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. So whoever he was with, which must have been the people of Judah, the guys out fighting, brought him to Jerusalem. And then in the next verse, we see they're fighting against Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's the part there that kind of got me kind of like, wait a minute. They brought him to Jerusalem, but they hadn't conquered it yet. So I was kind of wondering about such a thought.
Well, I looked at it as a army campaign, and they were marching up, and they get to Jerusalem outside the gates. And so they're outside the gates, and then it tells about in the next verse what happened at that point. But maybe they all marched off after they got through doing their job there. So,
Yeah, you might have passed away a lot sooner than I think, huh?
well, yeah, if you're wounded from your hands and your feet, and you're marching along. I don't know how old the guy was. He might have been a real old guy or something too. If he had 70 kings, he must have been fighting with a lot of them for a long time. So, anyway, now I think we're getting close to the end here. We'll go ahead and stop there, and we'll start. And then we can talk about Jerusalem some more next week, about what happened there. Okay, John, you got another song for us?
Turn to number 72. Be with me, Lord. 72. time that we have studied thy word together